Sarah lived in a cozy suburban home with neatly trimmed hedges, a well-maintained garden, and a warm sense of pride. She loved her house. It was more than just four walls. It was where memories were made. Her kids had grown up playing in the backyard, and every corner of the house held something special. Sarah wasn't just proud of her home. She was protective of it. That's why living under the watchful eye of the Homeowners Association, HOA, suited her perfectly. The HOA had rules for everything, from mailbox colors to lawn lengths, but Sarah didn't mind. In fact, she appreciated the orderliness it brought to the neighborhood. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah watered her flowers, she noticed a group of workers setting up barricades near her street. Curious, she walked over to see what was happening. A notice pinned to the community bulletin board caught her attention. It read, upcoming water main construction. Scheduled start next week. According to the announcement, the HOA planned to replace old underground pipes that ran beneath several homes, including hers. At first glance, it seemed like a good idea. After all, updated infrastructure meant fewer future issues. But something about the timing felt off. The next day, Sarah attended the monthly HOA meeting, hoping to get some clarity. The board president, Mr. Harper, stood at the front of the room, confidently explaining the project. He assured everyone that the construction team was highly experienced and that every precaution would be taken to avoid disruptions. "Your properties are safe," he said firmly, flashing a reassuring smile. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. When it was her turn to speak, she raised her hand hesitantly. "What happens if something goes wrong?" she asked. "I mean, digging around these old foundations could cause cracks or leaks." The room fell silent for a moment before Mr. Harper chuckled lightly. "Don't worry, Mrs. Thompson," he replied. "We've done this dozens of times. Nothing will happen to your basement." Despite his confidence, Sarah wasn't convinced. Over the weekend, she inspected her basement herself. Though it wasn't perfect, no older home ever was, she took comfort in knowing it was solid. The thought of strangers tearing up the ground nearby made her uneasy. As the days passed, heavy machinery rolled in, and the once quiet street buzzed with activity. Workers dug deep trenches, exposing layers of dirt and clay. Sarah peeked out her window often, watching nervously as the work progressed closer to her property line. Then one morning, while making coffee, she spotted thin hairline cracks forming along the lower part of her basement wall. Her heart sank. Rushing outside, she flagged down one of the foremen. "Excuse me," she said, pointing to the damage. "This wasn't here before you started working. Could this become a problem?" The man shrugged dismissively. "It's probably nothing," he muttered. "Just keep an eye on it." Sarah tried again, emailing the HOA board with photos of the cracks. Their reply came quickly but offered little comfort. "These things can occur naturally," they wrote. "Rest assured, we're monitoring the situation closely." Frustrated yet unsure how to proceed, Sarah decided to wait it out. After all, maybe they were right. Maybe it was nothing. Little did she know, this small oversight would soon lead to something far worse, a disaster waiting to unfold. The weather forecast had predicted rain, but no one expected the storm that rolled in late that evening. Dark clouds gathered ominously over the neighborhood, and within minutes, sheets of rain poured down relentlessly. The sound of water hitting rooftops echoed through the streets, mingling with the occasional rumble of thunder. Sarah sat in her living room, sipping tea and flipping through a magazine, trying to ignore the chaos outside. But her peace was short-lived. Around midnight, a loud drip drip drew her attention. At first, she thought it might be a leaky faucet upstairs, so she grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the basement door. When she opened it, her stomach dropped. Water was trickling down the steps like a miniature waterfall. Panic surged through her as she rushed down, only to find her basement completely flooded. Inches of murky water covered the floor, lapping against furniture legs and pooling around appliances. Her heart raced as she took in the scene. her washer and dryer submerged, boxes floating aimlessly, and precious family mementos ruined beyond repair. "Oh no," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. She waded through the icy water, trying to salvage what she could, but there was too much damage already done. Old photo albums, which held memories of birthdays, vacations, and holidays, were soaked and warped. A beloved quilt stitched by her grandmother lay sodden and discolored. Even practical items like tools and storage bins were now useless. The sight was overwhelming, and for a moment, Sarah felt paralyzed by despair. Once she regained her composure, she called the HOA emergency hotline, hoping they'd send someone immediately. Instead, she got voicemail. Frustrated, she left a message detailing the disaster and pleading for help. Then she called a local plumber friend who promised to come by at dawn to assess the situation. Exhausted and drenched from head to toe, Sarah spent the rest of the night frantically moving undamaged belongings to higher ground, praying the water wouldn't rise further. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the aftermath was devastating. Neighbors passing by stared curiously as Sarah hauled soggy carpets and broken furniture out onto the driveway. Word spread quickly about her flooded basement, and soon enough, an HOA representative arrived. Mr. Harper himself. He looked around briefly, his expression unreadable, before turning to Sarah. "This is unfortunate," he said calmly, "but you should know this kind of thing can happen during heavy rains." Sarah blinked at him, incredulous. "Heavy rains," she repeated, her voice rising. "This isn't just heavy rain. Look at my basement. It's destroyed. And those cracks I warned you about. They're probably why this happened." Mr. Harper shook his head dismissively. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but we can't take responsibility here. This is likely an act of nature. You'll need to contact your insurance company." With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Sarah standing amidst the wreckage, fuming with anger. Her mind raced as she replayed his words. Was he really blaming this on the weather? How could he ignore the obvious connection between their careless construction work and her ruined home? She clenched her fists, determination replacing despair. If the HOA refused to acknowledge their role in this nightmare, then she would have to find another way to hold them accountable. For now, though, she needed answers, and fast. Sarah spent the next few days in a haze of frustration and exhaustion. She barely slept, her mind replaying the events of that disastrous night over and over again. Every time she looked at her damaged basement, anger bubbled inside her. How could the HOA just walk away like nothing had happened? Their refusal to take responsibility felt personal, as if they were mocking her for trusting them in the first place. But amid all the chaos, a small thought began to nag at her, a memory from years ago, when she purchased her homeowner's insurance policy. She remembered sitting across from her insurance agent, who had explained the coverage options with such enthusiasm. "This isn't just about protecting your house," he'd said. "It's about giving you peace of mind." At the time, Sarah hadn't paid much attention to the specifics, but one phrase stuck out now. Asterisk water damage caused by external factors. Asterisk, could that apply to her situation? Her heart raced at the possibility. If her policy covered this kind of incident, then maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to bear the financial burden alone. The very next morning, Sarah dug through her filing cabinet until she found the thick stack of papers detailing her insurance plan. Flipping through the fine print, she scanned for anything related to water damage. Sure enough, there it was, a clause stating that her policy would cover damages resulting from issues outside her control, such as faulty infrastructure or negligence by third parties. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. The document also mentioned something called asterisk subrogation, asterisk, which meant the insurance company could pursue legal action against whoever was responsible after compensating her. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Sarah picked up the phone and dialed her insurance agent. After explaining the situation, she asked the critical question: "Does my policy cover what happened to my basement?" There was a brief pause on the other end before the agent replied, Let me check some details, but based on what you're describing, it sounds like it might. Those words gave Sarah hope for the first time since the flood. Her agent arranged for an adjuster to visit her home within the week. In the meantime, Sarah prepared meticulously. She documented every inch of the damage, taking dozens of photos from different angles. She made detailed lists of everything ruined: the furniture, the appliances, the sentimental items, and estimated their value. She even jotted down notes about the timeline of events, from the cracks appearing in her walls to the HOA's dismissive response. By the time the adjuster arrived, Sarah was ready. The adjuster, a middle-aged woman named Lisa, was thorough and professional. She inspected the basement carefully, asking questions and taking her own set of photos. When Sarah showed her the cracks in the foundation and explained how close the construction work had been, Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "This definitely seems suspicious," she admitted. "If we can prove the HOA's actions contributed to the flooding, your claim will be stronger." As Lisa wrapped up her assessment, she assured Sarah that the insurance company would review the case promptly. "We'll do our best to get you the support you need," she said. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to breathe a little easier. Even though the road ahead was uncertain, she finally had a lifeline. And if the HOA thought they could shrug off responsibility, they were about to learn otherwise. Filing an insurance claim turned out to be far more involved than Sarah had anticipated. She quickly realized that simply pointing at the flooded basement and saying, "This is their fault," wasn't enough. The process required her to become a detective of sorts, piecing together evidence and proving beyond doubt that the HOA's negligence had caused the disaster. It was exhausting work, but Sarah knew she couldn't afford to cut corners, not when so much was at stake. Her first step was cataloging every single item damaged in the flood. This meant sifting through soggy boxes, ruined furniture, and waterlogged appliances, making detailed notes about each one. Some losses were easy to quantify: a brand new washing machine here, a leather couch there. But others carried emotional weight that no price tag could capture. Old photo albums, hand-sewn quilts, and childhood toys were irreplaceable, yet she forced herself to assign values to them anyway. Her hands trembled as she wrote down estimates, knowing these numbers wouldn't bring back the memories attached to those items. Next came the contractor visits. Sarah needed professional opinions on the extent of the structural damage to her basement. She reached out to 3 different companies for repair quotes, wanting to ensure accuracy and fairness. Each contractor confirmed what she already suspected: the cracks in her foundation had worsened significantly due to the construction work nearby. One even went so far as to say, if they hadn't dug so close to your property without proper safeguards, this probably wouldn't have happened. Hearing those words validated Sarah's suspicions, but they also deepened her frustration. Why hadn't the HOA listened when she'd raised concerns earlier? As if gathering all this information wasn't stressful enough, Sarah also had to deal with endless phone calls and emails from her insurance company. Every document she submitted seemed to trigger another request for clarification or additional proof. At times, it felt like she was stuck in an endless loop of bureaucracy. But Sarah refused to give up. She reminded herself why she was doing this, not just for financial compensation, but for accountability. If the HOA could ignore her warnings and walk away scot-free, who's to say they wouldn't do the same thing to someone else? Finally, after weeks of painstaking effort, Sarah received word that her insurer had sent out an adjuster to assess the situation. The adjuster, Lisa, returned to Sarah's home armed with a clipboard and a keen eye for detail. Together, they walked through the basement again, examining every crack, puddle stain, and warped beam. Lisa asked pointed questions about the timeline of events and reviewed Sarah's documentation meticulously. When Sarah showed her photos of the initial cracks and shared screenshots of her emails to the HOA, Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "This looks solid," she said. "We'll present this evidence to our team and move forward." But Lisa also warned Sarah that things might not end quickly. "If we determine the HOA is liable, "We'll file a subrogation claim against them," she explained. "That means we'll try to recover the costs from them directly. Of course, they may fight back, so be prepared for a long haul." Though the prospect of a legal battle intimidated Sarah, she felt a sense of empowerment. For once, she wasn't alone in this fight. With her insurance company on her side, she finally had a chance to hold the HOA accountable and make sure they couldn't sweep their mistakes under the rug. When the HOA received notice of the insurance company's intent to pursue subrogation, their reaction was swift and aggressive. Sarah had expected some pushback, but nothing could have prepared her for the full force of their retaliation. It started with a formal letter delivered to her mailbox, accusing her of exaggerating the damage and attempting to exploit the situation for personal gain. The tone was cold and accusatory, painting her as someone who thrived on drama rather than a homeowner seeking justice. Things escalated quickly from there. During the next HOA meeting, Mr. Harper addressed the community, subtly shifting the narrative to make Sarah look like the villain. "We understand that accidents happen," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "But we must be cautious about jumping to conclusions. Some individuals seem eager to point fingers without considering other factors." Though he never mentioned Sarah by name, everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Whispers spread through the neighborhood, and soon enough, Sarah began noticing sideways glances and hushed conversations whenever she passed by. What hurt most was the lack of support from her neighbors. Many of them avoided her altogether, clearly uncomfortable taking sides in what they saw as a dispute between her and the HOA. A few even went so far as to suggest that Sarah should have installed a sump pump in her basement, a claim that infuriated her. "How dare they blame me for something I couldn't have predicted?" She fumed to herself late one night, staring at the ceiling. "They act like I wanted this to happen." Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah refused to back down. She leaned heavily on her attorney and the insurance adjuster, Lisa, both of whom assured her that she had a strong case. To bolster their argument, they brought in expert witnesses, engineers and hydrologists, who specialized in water drainage systems. These professionals conducted thorough inspections of the construction site and Sarah's property, producing detailed reports that left little room for doubt. According to their findings, the HOA's failure to implement proper drainage measures during excavation had created a perfect storm, quite literally. The rainwater had nowhere to go but into Sarah's basement. Armed with this evidence, Sarah's legal team filed a formal complaint against the HOA, outlining their negligence and demanding accountability. But the HOA wasn't ready to admit defeat. Their lawyers countered with arguments designed to muddy the waters, claiming that Sarah hadn't done enough to mitigate the damage. They also tried to shift blame onto the weather, arguing that the storm was unprecedented and therefore unavoidable. The back and forth dragged on for months, testing Sarah's patience and resolve. There were days when she questioned whether it was worth all the stress and scrutiny. Yet every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the ruined photos, the warped furniture, and the dismissive way Mr. Harper had brushed off her concerns. This wasn't just about money. It was about standing up for herself and ensuring the HOA couldn't treat anyone else this way. As the court date approached, Sarah found strength in small victories. Neighbors who had initially dismissed her began reaching out privately, admitting they'd noticed similar issues with their own properties after the construction. One couple even offered to testify on her behalf, sharing how cracks had appeared in their foundation too. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to feel hopeful, not just for her own case, but for the possibility of real change within her community. The courtroom was quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of the judge's pen against the desk. Sarah sat nervously in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together. Months of preparation, stress, and sleepless nights had led to this moment. On one side of the room sat her attorney, calm and collected, with folders full of evidence neatly stacked on the table. Across the aisle were the HOA's lawyers, their expressions unreadable but visibly tense. The air felt heavy, as if everyone knew that today would mark a turning point. When the judge finally called the court to order, both sides presented their arguments. The HOA's lawyer began by downplaying the severity of the damage, suggesting that Sarah's basement flooding could have been caused by natural wear and tear or poor maintenance. They argued that the storm was an unforeseen act of nature and insisted that no amount of precaution could have prevented it. When they brought up the lack of a sump pump in Sarah's basement, she clenched her fists under the table, resisting the urge to stand up and shout. But then it was Sarah's turn. Her attorney methodically laid out the case, piece by piece. First came the photos, cracks forming along her basement walls during the construction phase, water pooling ominously after the rainstorm, and finally, the devastating aftermath of the flood. Next were the expert testimonies. An engineer explained how improper drainage systems at the construction site had redirected water straight toward Sarah's property. A hydrologist added that the HOA's failure to account for rainfall runoff made the disaster inevitable. Each word hit like a hammer, dismantling the HOA's defenses. Sarah herself took the stand, speaking clearly and confidently despite her nerves. She described the cracks she'd noticed early on, the emails she'd sent warning the HOA, and the dismissive responses she'd received. Her voice wavered slightly when she talked about the ruined family heirlooms and irreplaceable memories lost in the flood, but she remained composed. By the time she stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. After hours of deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. The HOA was found liable for the damages. Not only did they have to compensate Sarah for the repairs and replacements, but they were also ordered to pay punitive damages for their reckless disregard of safety protocols. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the HOA's lawyers exchanged defeated glances. For Sarah, relief washed over her like a tidal wave. All the frustration, anger, and exhaustion melted away in that single moment of vindication. News of the ruling spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once avoided Sarah now approached her with apologies and congratulations. Many admitted they'd underestimated her determination and courage. Others began sharing their own grievances with the HOA, emboldened by Sarah's victory. Slowly but surely, the community started holding the HOA accountable, demanding transparency and better communication. For Sarah, the win was more than just financial compensation, it was validation. After months of being dismissed and belittled, she had proven that standing up for herself wasn't just possible, it was necessary. As she walked out of the courthouse that day, the sun shining brightly overhead, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was a catalyst for change. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to smile. With the settlements secured, Sarah turned her attention to rebuilding, not just her basement, but her life. The HOA's compensation check allowed her to hire a team of contractors who transformed her damaged space into something far better than before. They installed state-of-the-art waterproofing systems, including a sump pump and French drains, ensuring that no storm could ever threaten her home again. The walls were reinforced, painted in soft, cheerful colors, and adorned with family photos carefully restored by a specialist. New furniture and appliances brought warmth back into the room, while clever storage solutions made it functional and inviting. But the renovation went beyond physical repairs. It symbolized resilience. Every nail hammered and every tile laid reminded Sarah of how far she'd come, from feeling powerless to standing tall against injustice. She even added personal touches, like a small plaque engraved with the words, "Strength through adversity." It served as both a reminder of her journey and a tribute to those who had supported her along the way. Word of Sarah's victory spread throughout the neighborhood, inspiring others to speak up about their own frustrations with the HOA. What started as whispered complaints over backyard fences turned into organized meetings where residents voiced concerns collectively. Sarah became an unofficial leader in these discussions, sharing what she'd learned about navigating insurance claims, legal processes, and effective communication. Her experience gave her neighbors hope that change was possible if they worked together. The HOA, meanwhile, found itself under intense scrutiny. Faced with mounting pressure from residents and fearful of further lawsuits, they implemented sweeping reforms. Clearer guidelines for construction projects, mandatory inspections during high-risk work, and improved channels for resident feedback became standard practice. While some skeptics doubted whether these changes would last, Sarah remained cautiously optimistic. At the very least, the HOA now knew they couldn't act recklessly without consequences. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, months after the ordeal began, Sarah hosted a small gathering in her newly renovated basement. Friends, neighbors, and even a few former critics came to celebrate not just her new space, but her courage and determination. As laughter filled the air and glasses clinked in toast, Sarah took a moment to reflect on everything she'd endured. The flood had been devastating, emotionally, financially, and mentally, but it had also taught her lessons she might never have learned otherwise. She realized that adversity can either break you or build you stronger, depending on how you respond. For Sarah, this challenge had revealed a side of herself she didn't know existed. Fearless, resourceful, and unyielding. She wasn't the same woman who had nervously approached the HOA board months ago, hoping for reassurance. Now she stood taller, spoke louder, and carried herself with quiet confidence. As the party wound down, one neighbor pulled Sarah aside. "You've inspired us," he said sincerely. "If you hadn't stood your ground, none of this," he gestured toward the lively crowd, "would have happened. You changed things here." Sarah smiled, humbled yet proud. She hadn't set out to be a hero, but sometimes ordinary people doing extraordinary things leave lasting impacts. And as she closed her front door that night, surrounded by a community beginning to heal, she knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she'd face them head-on. After all, she'd already faced the worst and emerged victorious.